When was the last time you watched a video where it didn't skip a frame every second? When was the last time you had a day where it didn't feel like you were content switching the entire time? Where you just sat back, relaxed, and maybe looked up at the clouds? I have an idea I coined a long time ago called a breath of fresh air, which is so much of positivity in the modern day can be summed up as just a short breath of fresh air. I remember I described it once with how you see these things in movies where somebody goes on vacation on a yacht or some boat like that, and for the most part, the most positive thing about the experience is the feeling of not being suffocated, of just a freedom, just a calmness. When was the last time you had a break? You didn't check your phone for a day, a week, where you didn't have people around you always reinforce who you believe you are, who tell you that you are a certain way, and where you don't do that to yourself, where you don't listen to your mind about who you believe you are. When was the last time you had a breath of fresh air? And now, for today's topic, very different vibe, but let's go. We're going to talk about the different things I learned from the different cultures around the world. And today we're going to talk partially about cultural baggage. And we're going to use health as a way of understanding cultural baggage. I've, l- for those who don't know, I've lived in nearly 50 countries over the past 9 years. I've just been traveling all the time, and during the time, I get a peek into a lot of different cultures. Um, and I want to combine them all here. I'm going to use Cree to begin with, and then I'm going to go further into a few bonus country cultures. So let's start with India. So I grew up in India, and so I lived in India until the age of 18, and I had a like pretty typical Indian childhood when it came to how things were with respect to health. I had asthma as a kid. I was in and out of hospitals, but around the age of 15, 16, I basically started optimizing my own health. I came up with the I basically started believing that my health is under my control, and I got into running, then got into the gym, and then won the um, state powerlifting competition. And one of the things I learned during the time was action is questioned, inaction is never questioned. So the person that goes high protein is questioned. The person that's eating carbs in front of the TV is not questioned. The person that goes to the gym is questioned. The person that's getting fat sitting on the couch is not questioned. There's always a highlighting of risks. There's not a highlighting of a positive vision. There's only like what ifs. Um, and it taught me very early on that there's just way too much inaction. Um, that the person who doesn't go to the gym is not relevant for the conversation. I think I learned this from Alcoholics Anonymous, where the first idea around Alcoholics Anonymous is you exclude the alcoholics in your life. And one of the things I learned very early on from getting way into fitness in an Indian community is you exclude the people that don't do, that don't have the oomph, that don't have the shut the fuck up and just go to the gym. There's all the caveats, hundreds of caveats. Cool. You have just caveats in that world, but you don't have the action. So it very early taught me on that, and then I started working as a personal trainer, and it taught me this section, which may not sound nice to some of you, but I think you should embrace. The fat person is always lying. They are always lying about how much they walk. They're always lying about how much they eat. They're always lying about how much they sleep. And they're always lying about the fact that they've tried everything. They have hundreds of excuses, always full of shit. So it taught me very early on that the caveats don't matter. The risks are usually an excuse. Here's an example, which is early on, I started having a high protein diet. And I remember that everyone highlighted risks of high protein. That if you have a high protein diet, that your kidneys are going to shut down, blah, 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 blah. They just have like every action that goes against the crowd is treated as, oh, that's high risk. And I just realized that it's not a conversation about facts. It's basically a mimesis. What does everyone else believe, and how can you do anything different? So in that world, we actually, India has run the experiment, and we know what happens if you are tolerant, if you actually accept inaction as a virtue. um, the Over the past 3 years, there was a headline that blew my mind, which was in one part of India, they had a training selection for police inspectors, I think. So they had selections for police juniors. And one of the weirdest headlines of all time was that over 10 people died when they were forced to run a 10K. Just think of how crazy that is. 10 people died, like just died. 10K is not a lot. Like if you told a large group of people to run a 10K, I understand if some people are tired and on the floor out of breath. The first time I ran a 10K, I probably felt that way. But it should not kill you. That's crazy as hell. So we learned um so my I always kept the Indian bubble in my mind and paid attention to it over the years, because I realized that it taught me a lot and prepared me for the world as more of the world became like that. So I have a theory, which will be another podcast, called How the World is Becoming More Indian. And it has nothing to do about Indian people, but about how the culture in the world is becoming the ideas which existed in India. So it's basically, if you pay attention to 25-year-old Indians today, you can predict 35-year-old Westerners 5 years from now. So it's very like useful as a bubble. So we know that India, for example, has a 20. So the culture of tolerance, of acceptance of inaction, leads to people dying by running a 10K, and it leads to 20% of the population having diabetes when the average age is 27. It's a wacky world. It's a world where ideas like it's your genetics, bro, or yeah, I've tried everything, it's out of my control, are tolerated. And it taught me very early on that these are all bullshit ideas and should never ever be accepted. A person that doesn't go to the gym 1,000 times, especially a guy, should be treated like an alcoholic. Those are not real. Like everything they're saying is basically like an alcoholic. That they are that there's that the moment they've quit it, their beliefs change. So the moment the person actually starts walking, starts sleeping, starts exercising, their um, that their no longer believe the thing they believed. And their excuses of it being their culture is often basically a bullshit excuse that should never be tolerated, which is you don't wait for the culture to change, you just tell individuals to call the culture fucking stupid, change their own life, and move on. So that was one of the things it taught me about. So India has always had a very useful rabbit hole because it taught me that you don't have to wait for the world around you to change. It's basically your choice as an individual to fucking not listen at all to people who are wrong. And it taught me that it doesn't matter even if a billion people are wrong, you can just do the right thing. It doesn't matter where you're from. You can just be observe what is true, like going to the gym, like sleeping, like walking, doing those things, and everything in your life becomes obvious. And we know what happens if we don't. We end up in a world of people dying after running a 10K. So then, the number two culture was the United States of America. There's a meme the whole internet and everyone around the world likes to joke about, which is the fat Americans, the fat and loud Americans. Ha ha ha! Look at the Americans; they are so fat. And part of it is because America as a cultural force is so dominant that everyone else has to kind of cope that they are not the dominating culture. And especially with health, I think the sad thing about pointing out the negatives is is missing out on the positives, which is take any idea which you believe has helped people in health over the past 10, 20 years, especially on the cutting edge or especially on the internet. Doesn't matter if it's Renaissance periodization, if it's keto, if it's sauna getting popular, all of these ideas, every single health idea that probably you're implementing right now came from the US. What I did learn over time was by focusing on the majority, people were missing out on the fact that the top percentile, 0.1% of the US, is the best 0.1% in the whole world because it's a melting pot that brings in all the best people. So take even the Canadian folks who are in the fitness industry, for example, they're almost more Americanized than they're Canadian. Doesn't matter if it's Jeff Nippard, more plates, more dates, or all of these guys. It's like almost all of them are more in the American fitness bubble than they're in the Canadian fitness bubble. So in the process, if you make the joke of like, haha, the Americans are just fat and loud, you're actually missing out on the best health information. No matter where you are in the world, you're not going to get better health information in your own personal country. So, if you're Argentinian, the only rational choice is stop listening to Argentinians on health, listen to the Americans. If you're Indian, never listen to any Indian on health, listen to the Americans. If you're German, stop listening to somebody speaking German, listen to the Americans because they have the best information. Now, America as a country may have too much physical space tax for you to want to move there. There's too many, like it's a lot more of an effort to get organic grass fed stuff compared to some other parts of the world. So, what you the solution is not, hey, I need to move to SF and then I can adopt, or I need to move to Austin and then I can adopt the perspective of the top 1.1%. It's like, no, you just take the worldview, the best worldview possible, and adopt it in the best place possible. You don't have to always go to the place where the worldview exists. So, in this example, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you're watching this, you've got the internet. If you've got the internet, you can get the best information from the Americans. What you probably have to let go is the fact that you think that the person on the video has to look like you or that the Americans are stupid. Let that perspective go. That's probably keep holding you back. All right, coffee break right now. So today I'm actually having very heavy cream. I just whipped it with maple syrup. I really liked this. I got into the habit of this recently, which is cream and maple syrup. So since I've gotten you here, I can actually have a commercial break, which is I would like you to go to my website. It's on the description below, and give me a topic that you would like me to talk more about. So the third culture, which I got a lot of exposure to, that helped me a lot with health, was the Europeans, especially the Northern Europeans. The thing about Europe is it's almost the biggest idea in Europe, in health around Europeans, is Europeans are so much healthier than Americans. It's the most midwit perspective I've ever heard, and I'm going to basically completely alienate it here so we can move past. So the Europeans always live in a world where they compare themselves to the Americans on health. Yes, and it's basically Reddit is a good example of this. Um, and Americans do the same, which is um, we know for a fact that if you look at the data of Europe and the US going back, we know that Germany is always 15 years behind the US and UK is 15 years behind the US. So, for example, if 10 years ago you said, oh my god, these Americans are so fat, what you would have to do if you were logically consistent would be to say that exact same sentence of everyone in the UK today, which is, oh my god, the UK people are so fat, they are as fat as the Americans 10 years ago. And now Germans, damn, Germans, you got so fat, you are as fat as the Americans 15 years ago. And we know that will be the case going forward. We know 10 years into the future, the UK folks are going to be as fat as the Americans are today. Now, this is a data trend that has existed for 50 years, 60 years. No matter how far you look back, you realize that um, not a single European, like all the European cultural habits does is delay becoming as fat as the Americans. So it exists in this not that bad space. I had this quote on one of my old articles, which was, not that bad is a phrase people will use when they don't want to face the reality of what's in front of them. So it's not good. It's just not that bad. We're not as fat as the Americans. Germany is over 50% overweight. Like, what kind of crazy reality do you have to live in where you think a country that's getting more fatter every year is something to look up to? So the midwith hell when it comes to perspectives here would be that Europeans fall into the trap of com- living in relativistic worlds where as long as they are slightly thinner than the Americans, they don't care that they're getting more unhealthy for every year. And that's a wacky ass world. That's a world which I find so crazy that I don't really see any value in that. It's the Americans have a similar version, which is every intellectual um, person who has too many degrees but hasn't gone to the gym 1,000 times will bring up Colorado as an example, which is Colorado is a state in the US that has the lowest obesity. But in the past 15 years, Colorado's obesity has doubled. So when everyone is like, oh yeah, let us do a study about how Colorado has the lowest obesity, maybe altitude has something to do with reducing obesity. And I just feel like, guys, it's gone from 15% to 30%. What the fuck is wrong with you? Do you have an IQ of a P that you think that's actually a relevant thing to study? That a place that doubles in obesity is a good case study? Shut the fuck up and go to the gym. What's wrong with you? So basically, you realize this the midwit hell is this perspective of relativistic comparison of places which are not actually getting better. It's just this place is getting less bad than the other place. Another relevant example of midwit hell when it comes to Europe will be in this podcast. Up till now, your reaction is probably, if you're very European, you probably got a reaction of we should not generalize people. Individuals exist. That people, like each person is an individual, and that you can't generalize cultures. And that's often just a cope from the fact that, and I've never heard an idea like that from a person who acts individually. People who say shit like this are almost just going along with their culture and not actually just standing by themselves as an individual. It's basically a mid with bullshit ideas, because you can generalize things because you do learn different things from different cultures. For example, there's zero people who've gone to the gym 1,000 times who ever get stuck in Europe versus America, or Colorado is very healthy, because they're not fucking stupid, because they've just gone to the gym like you probably should if you're listening to this podcast. So these are like a very clear examples, and they give you a very um, wide perspective, which is you realize that you need to understand all of these things, because one, you get the best solutions, and you see the failure modes that people fall in the trap to. So, for example, this podcast. I don't think this podcast will help people to change their life dramatically, because we know for a fact that when it comes to actually helping individuals with their own, let's say, obesity or fat loss things, it's not a logistics conversation. It's not an informational conversation. It's often helping somebody with like their childhood trauma, and letting them work with it and come out on the other side, so they don't wake up in the middle of the night and like eat, because it's those things, those behaviors are not logical behaviors, they are emotional psychological behaviors. So the actual solutions would be you understanding, like, would be that this podcast is for people who are not in the scenario, understanding all the facts that actually exist, to then help the people by giving them personal breath of fresh air, which is the thing that will actually help the individuals involved here. Would be taking your friend, making your friend take a break from their work, taking them to a um, village along the Mediterranean, and just walking with them on the beach every day and just having conversations with them. That is probably the thing that is going to help the individuals who are the most far gone. But and it's not going to be conversations about logistics, because these are belief conversations. Now, if you are not at the extreme, you can always go further, which is, even though we know for a fact that we are not going to help the people that are struggling the most by just spouting facts, we should never lie about what are the facts. Which is, just because the fat person in the room says that they've tried everything doesn't mean you give that idea a pass. I grew up in cultures that did that. India basically is a very good example, where every time a person's lying, especially if they're older, everyone in the room keeps their mouth shut and gives the idea a pass. That doesn't help anyone. That doesn't. So I think you should always be like, no, the fat person is lying. There are obvious solution. It is obvious that you go to the gym. It is obvious that you walk, and then you also have the complexity of all the other things in, like, hormonal, endocrine disruptors, all of those things. But you don't act like the actions aren't simple, because they often are. So now let's go into bonus content. We've got so one of the bonus content for this episode, bonus cultures, is Latin America. One of the things you learn very quickly with Latin America is to chill. You get that a lot more in Latin America than you do with the Mediterranean right now. So if you go to Argentina, it doesn't matter how bad things are for this economic crisis or that economic crisis. The weekend will still be enjoyed. They'll try and get together in asado. They'll open a fernand. They'll make some coke. They'll put it in a glass. They'll just chill and have fun. They might do it on the side of the road if they don't have a space to have it. But they'll just relax. So if many cultures around the world are too stuck up in getting a mortgage, getting a career, focus on this. One of the things you learn very quickly with Latin America is chill, bro. Doesn't matter, mañana, mañana. So you really get into the vibe of chilling. The purpose of life, the purpose of working isn't for some weird next year, 10 years from now that will never come. It's for today. It's working to live. And Latin America is one of the best cultures in the world to teach you that. Um, so, and let's bring that back to health. So, one of the things almost know for it should be considered a fact. I don't know if we can call it a fact, but the most important health intervention is probably low stress. It's obvious that the most important thing you should do is stress less. Now, how do you prescribe stress? We've all been in a situation, especially if when you're in a relationship, which is relax. That doesn't work. You can't just tell somebody to relax and it works. So, how do you prescribe low stress? It's hard. You can make people experience different versions of it. Like I said, make people experience a breath of fresh air. Um, but the thing is, the idea of low stress is hard because it has two things you need to balance, which is you want to always be low stress. You want to optimize your life to always have less stress as possible. However, there are certain interventions which are true. We know that if you go to the gym, you'll be better. We know if you improve your VO2 max, you'll feel better. So you want to have a like a shell of low stress that slowly lets in new ideas in a calm, relaxed fashion. And this is where almost I go back to that idea of like it's almost like trauma or other things, because if I tell you that running 2 times a week is good for you, do you take it as an attack on yourself? Like if I tell you that a solution is better, do you take it as, oh, you're telling me that I'm not good enough, that what I'm doing is not good enough? So, but no, I'm going to fight against it. I am good enough, which means running 2 weeks is not necessary. I think that's a version, like if you're insecure, you take things to that perspective, which is solutions are treated as attacks on your personality. And I do think there's a better way, which is I don't run 2 times a week, but I know that it will improve my VO2 max. So I just observe that and I'm like, 2 times a week zone 2 running is probably good. I should get to it. So I consider that an obvious, and then it takes me sometimes a year. Sometimes it's taken me 10 years. Like I remember I had the quote, um, the people in the gym should go do yoga, the people doing yoga should go in the gym. I said that in like around 12 years ago, but it was only 2 years ago that I did yoga almost every day. So it took me 10 years to go from observing something is good to doing it. And as time has gone on, that gap has improved. But I don't think, I think what often happens is people get into this um, way, into this reality where solutions are treated as attacked on what they're doing right now, which is that their current workouts are not good enough, or that, and in the process they are not good enough. So uh, I so again, you can use self work or any other word you might use, but on the other side of it, solutions can be treated as things which are obvious, but at the same time you optimize around lower stress while still also doing the things which are obvious. So now a third bonus culture, no, second bonus culture is South Asia. Oh no, Southeast Asia. So I lived in Vietnam and other parts of Southeast Asia for maybe 2 years. And one of the things we know about cultures is different cultures are have different I'll say it another way, which is we know for a fact as GDP goes up, different cultures get fatter different rates. So, for example, I'll use three countries: Vietnam, China, India. For every $1 GDP per capita, India gets fattest the most, then China, and then Vietnam. So, Vietnam is the culture that stays thinner the most for every $1 you give them. Now we got data like this of GDP per capita and obesity of the entire world, and then you have certain examples like Singapore. Singapore got very rich, but it's still the thinnest country. And then you have other exceptions like Kuwait or the Pacific Islands where they get very rich and immediately get very fat. So for every $1 you give a Kuwaiti, they get a lot fatter than for every $1 you give a Singapore guy. So we you have data like this that goes back many years, and you can see how along so that different cultures are good at certain things. Now let's target specifically Singapore and Southeast Asia. Um, in this example I just gave, Vietnam, China, and India. Vietnam's Vietnam's culture makes it so that it gets for every incremental dollar, it's relatively thinner. That word is very important, which is it's still getting fatter. It's still getting worse health outcomes. And I think there's so much of this comes down to cultural beliefs and ideas, which is there's there's a phrase which is my dad didn't go to the gym, and all it takes is one generation saying that my dad didn't go to the gym for the next generation to be fat. So we know from newspaper reports that doctors in Vietnam now are very worried about the speed at which kids are getting obese. So these are actual headlines you can Google, which is that the obesity rate in kids is doubling at a very quick rate in Vietnam. And all of this is basically because the culture didn't have a lot of calories or food, and it was moving a lot, and both of those two things change at the same time. People are moving less and there's more food resources, etc. So both of those two things change at the exact same time, but the culture doesn't change. Like how in India I said, everyone has bitch ass excuses for not going to the gym. And one of the biggest bitch ass excuse is my dad didn't go to the gym and he was thin, and I don't need to go to the gym and I feel like I'm pretty thin too. Every person I know who said that ended up fat 10 years later. So it's not a real idea that survives even 10 years. Just take a picture of somebody that actually says that and ask them to send a picture back. They'll probably be complaining about health things. However, so that's one of the big issues is it's thinner, not thin, which is it doesn't survive one generation. So every single place where culture keeps people thinner is still getting worse over time. And then the second issue is the phrase skinny fat. The phrase skinny fat isn't a internet meme word or a joke to or an insult. It's actually partially a medical term, which is skinny fat was coined by I think doctors in South California when it came to the Indian community. So let's bring up short diversion in the two failure modes of BMI. One of the failure modes of BMI, which is I would call the stupid version of failure mode of BMI, which is when people say, yeah, if you so BMI mainly has three things, which is your weight can be summed up as the summation of three things. Let's ignore water, which is muscle, bone density, and fat. And the one failure mode of BMI is, yeah, if you have too much muscle, that you will be called overweight when you look normal. I'm overweight. Do I need to tell you that BMI is not accurate for me? No. If somebody is telling you that BMI is not accurate for them, it's probably true, and that they're using like bullshit ideas like, oh yeah, if you have too much muscle, BMI is inaccurate as a coping mechanism. They don't have too much muscle, it's a bullshit idea. So that's a failure mode, what I call stupid. BMI is outdated. There's another version, which is doctors in California noticed that um, Indians, especially South Asians, and this is true for Asians in general, have low muscle mass, low bone density, but high fat amount. And what happens if you have low muscle mass and bone density at a high, while holding on higher fat is you'll be normal weight, but you'll have the characteristics and the risk factors of somebody who's overweight. Or you'll be overweight and you'll have the characteristics and risk factors of somebody that's obese. So basically, skinny fat means that you have low muscle mass, low bone density, and you have high fat such that BMI doesn't work for you. That is an actual failure mode of BMI. The muscular part is often bullshit coping mechanisms from people that don't have a lot of muscle. But this is an actual failure mode of BMI. And this is basically where the phrase skinny fat was coined. Now, cultures like Vietnam, like Singapore, and many South Asian cultures are quite good at the thinner part of the conversation. They're quite good at basically having certain habits that I'm not a fan of, like fat shaming and stuff, but it leads to people having lower fat percentage. The culture is good at that. It's not that good that it will survive 20 years, but it's okay. It's the best in the world, relatively. But it's not good at the muscle mass conversation. And we know for a fact that muscle mass is one of the most important things to actually improve your life, especially as you get older. So the failure, the I would say the missing idea that happens in cultures like Singapore, in cultures like Vietnam, is gain muscle mass. And this is where I remember I had a conversation a while back where I said it's so much easier to change worldviews than to have incremental ideas. People dismiss worldviews like this entire bubbles where all the solutions are completely solved. For example, if you want to solve muscle mass, you have one simple solution: just observe absorb the entire worldview of a bodybuilder. Bodybuilders have solved muscle gain. It's not a debate. And if you make jokes like, haha, they're just on steroids, you're missing the point. You're missing the point that nobody has done as much research on muscle gain as bodybuilders. So instead of living in this world of, oh, I'm going to try and get a little bit fit, just 100% embrace the worldview and the solutions of a pro bodybuilder. For example, Renaissance Periodization, Jeff Nippard, or whatever other channels. You just 100% embrace it, remove the downsides. For example, never go on anabolics, never compete, probably never use Instagram because it gets you to mimetic and then you might fall into the other two traps. So, remove the failure modes of the worldview and just keep all the upsides. We don't need to have debates of, oh, let me read what this other rationalist or what this other tech bro said about muscle gain. That's a failure mode because you're settling for okay information. It's okay, but you could get 100 times more information if you just said, it's like the American example. Why would you settle for what a Swede wrote about health when the American has written 10 times better information? Similarly here, the bodybuilders have already solved hypertrophy. They already have all the solutions. You can just adopt that worldview, get 10 kilos, 20 pounds of muscle, and continue on with your life. You don't have to be a bodybuilder. Jog, continue working on your SaaS product, continue being a nurse, continue doing whatever else you're doing. You just adopt the worldview, get the result, move on. And I think part of this is so often stuck in this middle ground of people are having incremental ideas instead of just adopting worldviews. And the missing link in South Asia is muscle gain. It's always in this middle ground ideas where there's no just do 10 times more, just gain 10 kilos of muscle. So that's the failure mode, and you can learn from that, which is you can learn that. So your solution should be, which is calm down, chill, relax, observe the world the way it is today, which is everything I told you on this episode is kind of simple. I'm not telling you any complicated facts or theories or stuff like that. I'm just showing you the cultural habits that exist in different parts of the world and the beliefs people hold that keep them where that keep them from getting what they want. And I personally choose to not hold on to cultural baggage because I don't think it serves a purpose. I don't think in today's world you want to be stuck in any of these bubbles. I think you want to be able to just sit back, relax, observe all of this. Doesn't take you that much time. You can see this. Just spend a moment, look around you, learn from everyone, see the failure mode so we can help each other and we can all escape this together. Because my purpose with this is not to like make fun of the failure mode. Like I don't want to make fun of the Europeans. I want the Europeans to just get healthier because I know what happens in a world where we don't do the obvious. I grew up in that world. I know what happens if you don't go to the gym. People die. That's our world of today. Look around you. How many people are feeling like shit this year, and how many people are not being able to fight off simple diseases easily? We can reverse that. And one of the ways we reverse that is we look at every single issue and tell people to let their cultural baggage go. And one of the ways you can do it is by highlighting all the different cultures that exist, seeing what are the issues with their own culture, and helping the people in those cultures escape that. You got to get the 100x agency people to see the big picture. That's what this video is for. And each of those individuals can then share the ideas again, which is while I am telling you, just listen to the Americans. I know that most people won't, which means that if you're a guy from Singapore, you need to be the one to repeat all of these ideas for your audience. Because while it would be nice to live in a world where everybody can observe all of this, and that's the world I'm trying to create, you if you want to help a lot more people, you will end up meeting people where they are. So I don't know what my plan was with this video, but I just wanted to get these different ways that different cultures in the world help me understand health and just have a starting conversation, because this is just a start on how I look at health and fitness. Join me out and hope everyone's having a relaxing time because I know there's a lot of bugs going around. So take rest.